If everybody could just please take your seat over there. It's always intimidating to do a talk in an incredibly huge room with a relatively small audience, but all right. So the last time I gave a talk at EclipseCon, it was just as Java 7 launched. And I did a talk, 55 new things in Java 7, and I did it in 55 minutes. And so I guess I didn't realize, but you don't get 55 minutes anymore, right? There's been deflation in speaking time. So we have 35 minutes, 34 now, actually. Yeah, so I submitted the abstract, and full disclosure, I submitted the abstract for this talk before we had made several announcements about release cadence and Oracle building OpenJDK binaries, and there's been a few other things happen over the summer with the intent of largely talking about that kind of stuff. And luckily, everything happened and the abstract still kind of holds, but the abstract, it was a little vague, but I made sure that it could cover this. If there's something that I mentioned in the abstract that I didn't hit hard on the head for you, just come up after and I'm happy to talk about it offline. Also, if you're gonna have questions, please come up to the front because I'm sort of hard of hearing. All right, this is our safe harbor statement. If any of you are Oracle customers, when we put up a safe harbor statement, I always like to point out that Oracle's safe harbor statement is way better than IBM's safe harbor statement. So, all right. So first thing I want to do is, and I'm always amazed at how many people who are, especially in the application development side of things, I know a lot of people here are more on the tool side, platform developers, but I'm always amazed at how easily confused people can get over JVM, JRE, and JDK, and what is each. And when we say Java SE, what do we even mean? So when we talk about Java SE, we're talking about the whole technology that's covered through the JCP through a specification, all right? So we're talking, when we say Java SE, we mean everything, but Java SE is composed of a few key elements. So the first thing that we like to talk about is the JVM, and so you may know of the JVM as hotspot. You may know of the JVM as JRocket, which was from BEA, but then has been merged into hotspot. You may know of the JVM as OpenJ9 or J9 from IBM. But basically, the JVM is the process that runs on the hardware, right? So there's usually a specific JVM for a particular chipset or operating system or combination thereof. So it's the thing that's connecting the byte codes to the bare metal. And on top of that, we have a JRE. And the JRE has a JVM, of course, but it also comes with the standard libraries. So libraries for doing all of the input, output, or graphical things, or networking, collections, et cetera, et cetera. Many vendors will also include in their JRE some additional things like maybe a browser plugin that can launch an application either via applet or web start, or some other separate bits and pieces. Right? And then we have the JDK, and the JDK comes with a JRE, which comes with a JVM, and it includes developer tools. Right? So the most obvious is the compiler, so a Java compiler. But also there's lots of other tools in there like JavaDoc or JShell or other bits and pieces. So that's just a little bit of disambiguation of the different bits there. So now let's talk about OpenJDK. So for those of you that maybe haven't been involved, like there's a bunch of people here who obviously are day-to-day in OpenJDK, but for those of you that may not be involved, this is where, since 2006, we work in the open source implementation of Java SE. And for the longest time, until very recently, from an Oracle point of view, from a Sun point of view, we had always thought of OpenJDK as a place, not a thing. right? So it was a place where we collaborated on source code to build open source implementations of Java SE. However, recently, and I'll get into this in a bit, we do think of it more of as a thing now, where we will start to produce OpenJDK binaries and builds from Oracle, in addition to the many that are long existing, and start thinking and positioning OpenJDK in the ecosystem as a thing, not as a place. So just a quick history on OpenJDK. It's been around for a long time, right? So I know, and again, especially with application developers, they don't really think about OpenJDK that much because they just want to get the Oracle JDK, download it, use it, build their applications, and forget all that other stuff. That's what other vendors do. That's what, you know, Oracle and Red Hat and IBM and others do. But again, it has been around for a very long time. It's been around since 2006, so that means it was launched by Sun Microsystems. Red Hat was there at the very beginning. Red Hat has always been and continues to be a fantastic contributor and participant in OpenJDK, and they show a lot of leadership there. They were the first to do builds of OpenJDK, and they continue to produce high-quality builds that are distributed through RHEL and through other distribution mechanisms. Oracle itself, until recently, has redistributed Red Hat's builds of OpenJDK. Yeah, so again, this has been going on since 2006. Now, obviously, Oracle, Sun, and now Oracle were producing the Oracle JDK or the Sun JDK, and that was their first and foremost thing. But in the cases where you had customers or users that wanted to use the GPL, we would use the OpenJDK builds from Red Hat. So yeah, so it was launched in 2006, 2007, and then, you know, frankly, 2007 to 2009. If you recall that era, Sun was struggling a little bit, so OpenJDK just kind of floated along for a bit. But after the acquisition of Sun by Oracle, we doubled down aggressively on OpenJDK. So we went to Apple, who, if you recall, at that point in history, had their own separate Java implementation. We went to Apple and said, hey, why don't you contribute all this to OpenJDK, make your Mac OS ports open source, and we'll help you with that. Went to IBM and say, hey, why don't you work with us in OpenJDK? Why don't you look at some of the stuff that you have and what can be open sourced there? You have a bunch of ports, you have your own VM technology, and over the last year or so, we've seen IBM open source some of that at Eclipse. So that's all good news. Yeah, and then of course we have dozens and dozens and hundreds of companies and individual contributors that have participated and are participating in OpenJDK. The latest trend, of course, is we have pretty much every cloud vendor participating in one way or another. So just a few months ago, Amazon signed up, and they have a team that's doing OpenJDK builds. They've already contributed some high-quality patches around Mac OS port stuff that they had for their own internal fixes, for their own internal uses, and have included that. So it's very promising, and it's, you know, like I say, it's over the last 11 years, it's done nothing but accelerate, which is all good. So just to kind of look at the OpenJDK cycle, kind of the virtuous cycle of what makes this work is, oh, is this automatically animating? Okay, anyway. So yeah, so we start off with the OpenJDK project, and again, we used to think of this more as a place, the place where we had the source code repos and the governance board, and you know, we had various roles that were defined, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, these projects would work towards creating the reference implementation. So JDK 7, JDK 8, JDK 9 The reference implementation all came from OpenJDK builds that were collaboratively worked on with Oracle, Red Hat, and others. So we do that, but that's just a one-time thing, right? The reference implementation is just a moment in time, but that source code gets consumed by a lot of organizations, right? And you may know, especially if you're an application developer, you may know of the Oracle JDK, which is based on OpenJDK source code. You may know of the IBM Java SDK. You may know of Red Hat's builds. You may know of Azul's builds. You may know of SUSE's builds and Canonical's builds and Linaro's builds, and right. So we have all these different foundations and groups and companies working on these builds, but what you may not realize is that there are a lot of companies that have taken the OpenJDK source code and created their own very niche port or fork of OpenJDK for internal use. So Twitter, for example, they have OpenJDK, but you would, as a Java application developer, you may never recognize what it is that they do because they're working on terabyte-sized heaps. Right, so they have very special, very customized niche code that they're using internally, and there's a lot of companies that do that. So at Java 1 this year, we had Alibaba, who came and talked about some of the stuff that they're doing, which is in a similar vein. So, and then so basically, all these organizations and participants end up feeding back into OpenJDK, and we end up with this virtuous cycle. There's 12 million developers using Java, so that creates a strong and stable ecosystem. All right, so basically, OpenJDK current status is there's a clear commitment from Oracle post Sun acquisition. We've lived up to that in a big way over the last 10 years. Well, it's been 7 years, I guess, since the acquisition. And just this summer, we announced, and at Java 1, we had a keynote pretty much devoted to this, where for a long time we've had the Oracle JDK, and then other vendors have built OpenJDK binaries. And the Oracle JDK always had some extra pieces in it that were commercial, right? So we had flight recorder, mission control. We had been working on some deterministic garbage collection technology. We had ahead of time compilation stuff that we had been working on with an eye to commercialize that. But basically over the summer, just looking at the ecosystem and looking at modern application development and what especially looking forward to cloud development and what developers expect, we just looked at all that and said, we need to simplify this, right? So let's not have this separate Oracle JDK and then other people with the OpenJDK binaries. Let's open source all this stuff that we've been working on, and let's increase the release cadence. So I'll go through in a lot of detail the new release cadence and how you can kind of form a mental model around how that works versus how we used to do things in the past. But basically, we're tripling down, I guess, in OpenJDK is what I'm saying here. So we're going to start producing OpenJDK builds, and it's going to include all of the stuff that we had as a separate commercial feature in the past. All right. How am I doing for time? Still have 20 minutes, right? Yeah, okay, good. So we're good on time. So I have 2 daughters, and they love really, really corny jokes. And so they're the inspiration for me to try to insert some really corny jokes into the presentation here. So let's start. Knock, knock. Oh, yeah, okay. So just, not to put you guys down or anything, but I did this same talk in JAX London a couple weeks ago. When I said knock, knock, they said, who's there? Like instantly loud. So it's still too early in the morning. So let's try this again. Knock, knock. There we go. Okay, that's better. Who's there? All right. Java SE platform update. Yeah. So that's how it's been, right? That's how it's been since, if you look at the average time between Java SE releases, going back to the 1.2 timeframe, Java 1.2, so like 98 or so, it's been on average 32, 34 months between major releases, which, you know what, at the time, I think made perfect sense. And even 5 years ago, I think it made perfect sense. But that is just not how modern application development is done anymore. We simply cannot have long pauses between new feature availability, right? I'm jumping ahead, I guess, but all right. One more joke. What do you get when you cross open source and a paddle boat? A Canoe. Canoe. Yeah, and the point of this joke is to highlight that, again, modern application developers expect everything in their stack, or if they're stackless, everything in their stackless stack, to be open source, right? And under an easy to use, broadly used, familiar open source license, right? All right. So, just as Java's logo has transitioned to keep up with the times over the last 21 years, believe it or not, 21 years, so shall the way we think about builds and releases. Now, I'm about to go through a few slides that I'm going to mentally, just for the sake of simplicity, think of OpenJDK and the Oracle JDK as the same thing, and then I promise at the end I'll split it out, okay, so that you can kind of see what I mean by Oracle JDK and OpenJDK. And I know for some people, they only think of the Oracle JDK when they think of Java SE, and I know some people get frustrated when I talk in a way that presumes that there is only the Oracle JDK and that there's not all these other really good OpenJDK builds. So I'm just going to be upfront about that. So just bear with me and I'll separate it at the end. All right, so again, Oracle is going to start to produce OpenJDK builds. Our goal is that OpenJDK binaries become completely interchangeable with Oracle JDK binaries. We, in the Java platform group at Oracle, have never really liked it that it's been difficult for developers to go between OpenJDK binaries and Oracle JDK binaries, and it is difficult. There are some differences. We want to get rid of that entirely. And I don't just mean the commercial features. I mean, there's always been little idiosyncrasies, especially if you have a race condition happy type application. It's always been a challenge to move back and forth. So we're going to try to reduce that and eliminate it completely. All right, so let's look at the release model, and let's look at kind of the, let's look at like a historical perspective of it. So the goal was always every 2 years, right? Like we always did, even going back to the Sun era, always tried to have a 2-year release cadence. And yes, it was usually closer to 3. But just for the sake of the mental model going forward, let's presume we had said, we're gonna keep doing the old way of every 2 years, okay? So let's zoom in on that a little bit. Now, you can go and look at the release history. So on java.com, we actually just Google for Java SE release history, and you'll find a page that shows you the release of every date, the date of every release. And what you'll notice is for Java 7 and Java 8, we actually had a 6-month release cadence of feature updates within those major releases. So when we released Java 7, 6 months later, we had a 7 update that had new features in it. And then 6 months after that, there was another one that had new features in it, okay? So we have a history of doing 6-month feature updates. It's been there for many, many years. So if we were to look forward using the old semantics, we would say, okay, so we'll have 9, and in 6 months we'll have 9.1 and 9.2 and 9.3, and then a couple years out we'll get into 10 and so on and so forth. But what if we look at this a little bit differently? okay? And one of the things we struggled with is, yes, in every 6 months we had new features, but we could never introduce a feature that required working with the JCP and updating the specification. So we were doing 6-month feature updates, but we were never able to introduce a new language feature or change an API that was part of the specification. So we would kind of get stuck in the types of things we could update every 6 months. So what if we blow that up? And we've been working with the JCP for almost a year now to streamline how we go through the spec processes. And we've said, hey, and again, this has been for a year discussed at the JCP. There's a working group about having having OpenJDK and the JCP processes work together in a nice way. What if we can make spec changes on the go? So for example, in 9.1, what if we could introduce type inference? Like, what if we could put some type inferencing in, or change a little bit about how we do enums to make so you can put class types in there, or there was underscore was made a reserved word, so can we put that into lambdas? Like, so these are things that we would normally have had to wait 2 years to be able to do, that we can now do on a 6-month cadence. And those things I just said, by the way, are proposed for that next release. Okay, so we have a new way of thinking about releases. Okay, so yeah, we were always doing 6-month updates. We had always been doing 6-month updates, but now we're saying let's make it so we're able to do 6-month updates that we can get into the spec stuff. How many minutes do I have? 15? That doesn't sound right. When did I start? Really? I have 15? 10:30, but I have 35 minutes. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that's good. All right. Yeah. So, because we're gonna kind of blow up the way we think about these 6-month releases, one of the things we want to do is blow up the way, like, we need to shift people's mental model around this stuff. And so one of the greatest ways to shift people's mental models is to create a huge bike shed, right? And so what we've proposed is that we're going to change the version numbering to a year.month. And we're going to do 6-month releases in March and September. And we're going to, instead of going 9, 10, 11 or 9.1, 9.2, we're going to go year.month, right? So that people can, in their mind, separate the old way from the new way, right? So we'll have people that, like, let's face it, there will be people using, our grandchildren will be using Java 8. I'm positive of that, right? Java 8 is going to be around for a very long time, just like Java 6 was around for a very long time. So I want a way for people to kind of shift their mental model of between the old way and the new way of doing things. So that's why we've proposed this year.month versioning scheme, so that we get into this kind of clear perception that, okay, yeah, we have 6-month releases, this is the new way of doing things. Okay, now, if you are a enterprise and you're one of those companies that has said, holy crap, every 3 years is way too fast. Like, can't you guys slow this down and do a release every 5? And believe it or not, we get that, right? Like, half of the time I get feedback on release cadence, half of it is you're going way too fast, and half of it is you're going way too slow, which probably means we're in the Goldilocks zone, right? So what we want to do, though, is modern application developers, which are taking over the world and is where all the growth is, are, expect 6-month releases. Like, that's unquestioned. But we don't want to blow up how people consume and develop their applications. So what we're going to do is, just like we had done in the past, like, you can think about the old major release. Let's shift the thinking of that a little bit and just call those long-term support releases. And so the first long-term support release we've proposed is going to be 18.9, so that's next September. And you may think, oh my gosh, 9 is not a long-term support release. It's like, well, no. if I was to say that was 9 and 9U20 and 9U40 was going to be the long-term support release, nobody would bat an eye. Everybody would go, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense, because that's what we did for 7, that's what we did for 8, right? When we released 8, we did 8 update 20, and then we would never support you on 8. If you want to support, you need to reproduce the problem in 8U20. And then when we released 8U40, you needed to reproduce the issue in 8U40. We were never going to support you on 8U20, right? Same thing here. Okay, what we're saying is, work on 9. When 18.3 comes out, work on 18.3. When 18.9 comes out, work on 18.9. And then good news, 18.9 will have 5 years at least of nothing but security and stability updates. There'll be no new features. So if you're an enterprise, you'd go from 8 to 18.9, and you'd have a 5-year release. And I have a picture here that'll kind of show all that in line. All right. So the goal is every 3 years or so, and this, this can change depending on what's happening in the ecosystem, or if there's some incredibly major new feature that comes in and we say, you know what, we'd like to give that 6 more months to bake before we call it a long-term support release. So we can tweak that a little bit, but roughly the goal is every 3 years, we have roughly 5 years of long-term support, which gives you lots of time to move between the major releases, just as you always have, right? And so when I was talking about this in JAX London a couple weeks ago, which is mostly financial industry people, when I started talking about the first part, you could see the stress on everybody's eyes, like, oh, how are we going to keep up with 6 months releases? This is going to be a disaster. And then when I put this up, you could just see the relief, right? It's like, oh, okay, so what you're saying is for me, nothing has to change, right? I can just like, yeah, wake me when the next long-term support designated release comes along, right? And by the way, this model, sorry, just one sec. This model is like, this isn't like some thing that we invented out of thin air. This is a model that works very well for a number of open source projects and platforms. Yeah, sorry? Yeah, I'll talk about that. So our timeline for 8 is 2025 as of now. But I wasn't joking when I said like my grandkids will probably be supporting that. Actually, probably the biggest hindrance to, I was talking with somebody at breakfast about this. The biggest hindrance, I think, to the lifetime of 8 is going to be the 32-bit rollover problem in, what's that, 2038? Yeah, so somebody's going to have some work to do on that one. My kids. All right. Okay, so now let's inline here the current releases with the like the future releases, right? So we have JDK 6, JDK 7, JDK 8. They're rough timelines there. And again, to be clear, I'm conflating, the Oracle JDK, paid support option timeline here with what is in OpenJDK and who is working on that, right? But here like this kind of gives you the perspective of that. All right, so now let's overlay like how this looks from the Oracle JDK perspective. So while we are going to start working on OpenJDK builds, it is going to take some time for those to be completely interchangeable with OpenJDK, right? So we need to continue to produce the Oracle JDK as well. So for Java 9, for 18.3 and 18.9, we will continue to produce an Oracle JDK and OpenJDK builds from Oracle. And again, I would presume, I have no idea one way or the other, but I would presume that Red Hat are going to continue to produce their OpenJDK builds as they always have. And I would presume that Azul will. And I would presume that Linaro will keep doing their ARM builds and so on and so forth, right? But yeah, but this shows you like from an Oracle perspective, we're not going to go back in time and produce, Oracle is not going to go back in time and produce OpenJDK builds for 8, but I expect Red Hat will continue to do so, just as they continue to do so for JDK 6 and JDK 7, right? So even when Oracle takes the Oracle JDK and moves that into the commercial support offering, we have vendors like Red Hat who come in and take that over, And I would expect that to continue going forward, but you know, we'll see how that goes. Now these are also, like, so, you know, put another way, like this slide is Oracle's point of view of this. There's absolutely nothing that would stop anybody, any of the vendors I've mentioned, or any individual for that matter, to pick any one of these and decide that they would like that to have long-term support as well, right? So this is just Oracle's perspective and what we are intending to do in this space. All right, so then, you know, kind of condensing it all up, basically you can see we're going to a world where we'll have 6-month release cycles targeting modern application development. We will continue with the 6, 7, and 8 as we had, and then we're going to go to a long-term support model for those enterprises that frankly really liked that long period between releases and application transitions. So that was it for my slides. So I have 5 minutes for questions. And again, I would just like to remind you, I don't hear the best. So if you have questions, speak loudly, please. Yes? Mm-hmm. Well, so yes, so everything, okay, so the question for those in the back that may not have heard was about Java SE embedded and how this relates to that. So if you actually go to the Oracle Java SE embedded page, there's actually a couple of notes there about this. And I also published a blog on this just a few weeks ago, the Java Platform Group blog. If you just look for Java Platform Group blog at Oracle, you'll find it. So that'll have more details than what I can say right here. So for those of you that may not know, we've had a separate commercial-only embedded build of Java SE. It had very specialized ports, and you could do compact profiles, okay? We open sourced all of that code, all of those ports, including some mobile hooks, about 2 or 3 years ago. If you look at Java 9 with Jigsaw, the value proposition of compact profiles goes away, right? So the only value is really in the custom ports, right? So we've open sourced all that, and Oracle is not intending to have a Java SE embedded 9 and later, so we still have the Java SE embedded 8. But we've put ARM on restricted availability, and our intent is that the ecosystem is going to take that over because they largely have, right? So there's a couple of vendors, one in particular, a company called Microdoc. So they supply ARM-based ports of Java SE embedded on a commercial basis. But all the source code is there if anybody wanted to pick this up and run with it for free under the GPL. Yeah, so. Question there, a little, yeah. Yeah, so it's not now. So we still have to think about that a little bit because, like you say, the challenge is in order to build OpenJFX, you have to actually build an entire JDK with it, which is really really unfortunate, right? Because what we would like is that it's just a separate thing that can be kind of treated separately, right? So we have to figure that out. But you know, keep in mind that the strategy here is really about modern application cloud development, right? So we need to, you know, at Java 1, we've been talking to a number of companies and partners that may be interested in doing something with that and looking at the licensing, or if we can get in and finally get to making those changes that have it as a separate module, and you can just choose to plug it in or not. So I know it wasn't a yes/no answer, but that's the best I can do, I'm afraid. Yeah. 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 That will not change. So we will still have the Oracle JDK. It will still have the same commercial feature licensing that's there. But the good news is that sometime within the next year, we're aggressively working to open source that code and put it in our OpenJDK builds. So you'll have the option to just use that for free under the GPL. But the Oracle JDK, to the degree it exists going forward, is going to be a separate commercial thing. Yeah. So, yeah. All right. Time for one more question? One more? We can do one. Well, one more question. Yes. Yeah, it could be. It is, yeah, I know. Which is, you know, funny enough, it's like, which is why we padded all the spaces between the 8 U's, like why we went in increments of 20, right? It was so that if things did slip or we had to do an emergency release in the middle or something, we could still keep that. But there's lots of wonderful threads on this in the OpenJDK mailing list. So I would encourage you to hop in and participate because, like, you know, honestly, like we do take that stuff very seriously. But at the same time, like sometimes you gotta knock people in the shoulder a little bit to change the way you think about how things are being done. Because this is a change. This is different. And it does mean that, you know, some people are going to have to do more work with their tools and frameworks and applications than they had to do in the past. And I know that that can be a scary proposition when you're always resource constrained. But I think in order to keep up with modern application development, like this is a requirement. So, and I think we're out of time. Feel free to kind of catch me while I'm packing up my computer, but I don't want to abuse the extra couple minutes we had. So, all right, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Cheers.